If you've been watching my channel for quite some time, and if you have, thank you. You've probably noticed I've been teasing Robotboy for a long time, and there's a reason for that. You see, for me to review a show, I have to actually watch the show in its entirety. The thing about Robotboy is that I underestimated how tedious this show is. I'm 2 seasons in, and I don't want to watch this show again. The only reason why I'm reviewing this show this early on in the series is that I want to let my feelings towards Robotboy out of my head once and for all, because after this review, I don't want to watch, talk, think, remember, or even catch a glimpse of Robotboy. Maybe I shouldn't name this video Robotboy review. I should instead just call it What I've Seen from Robotboy So Far review, because I'm not even gonna bother watching season 3 and 4. If they're better, whatever, I seriously don't care. This is something not even nostalgia can save. And that's sad because I absolutely loved this show as a kid. I'm not messing around. If my younger self watched this review, he wouldn't even recognize himself. But you know what, whatever, I'm not a boy anymore. Now to kickstart this review, let's just address how stupid the concept for this show is. A scientist created a powerful artificial boy and gave it to a kid so that he could take care of it. You just delivered to a child a dangerous and destructive weapon. How do you even know you can trust him? In the opening sequence, Tommy called himself a fan of this scientist when he wrote a letter asking him how his latest invention was doing. So that means that Tommy could very well just be a fanboy that got lucky. I don't know. But what's even worse is that he gave Robotboy to Tommy knowing that bad people like Kamikaze could take drastic measures in order to obtain Robotboy. He just put a kid's life in danger knowing that his life would be put in danger. But you know what, maybe he has a good excuse.
Dear Tony, he had surpassed all expectations, but I fear he may fall into the wrong hands. So I'm sending him somewhere safe. Somewhere perhaps he can learn to be a true boy.
So wait, you want Tommy to teach Robotboy how to be a real boy, but you also don't want him to be seen in public. How the heck is he going to learn how to be a real boy if he can't interact with society? Also, what is even the point of teaching him how to be a real boy if he can't interact with society? Why do you even want him to behave like a real boy? If you want a son so bad, just have a son. You already have a wife. And if you can't have children, then adopt. Also, if you're so desperate to have Robotboy behave like a boy, why don't you just update his software? It sounds a lot safer. That way you don't have to worry about keeping Robotboy away from the public, and you don't have to give one of the most powerful and destructive weapons to a kid. Seriously. What the hell is wrong with this crazy man? You know what, it has a terrible concept. So what, the show can still redeem itself with the execution. And while the show still ended up sucking really hard, there are a few good things you can take away from it. Like, the art style is decent. Sure, it's a little too reminiscent of early to mid 2000s, but it's still decent. The backgrounds are half decent. The animation can range from lazy to good enough. The best usage of the animation is during the fight scenes, and while I don't think the action is that impressive, it is decent enough to be entertaining on some level, despite the impact of the punches being a little poorly executed. The concepts for some of the episodes are not half bad. They're not special, but they're not boring. Whether or not they executed well is a different story, but I wouldn't necessarily blame the ideas for the episodes for why the show is a wreck. The soundtrack is cool. This may be my nostalgia affecting me, but I really like the soundtrack. It's probably the best aspect of this show. Sure, they don't treat it well, but I'll get to that later. And yeah, that's everything nice I have to say about this show. Robotboy has one of the most tedious set of main characters. Take Tommy for example. If you've watched any show, and I mean any show or movie ever, then you know everything there is to know about Tommy. He's composed of the most overused and cliche protagonist traits. He's smart, he's a good kid, he's a dweeb. Oh, he also gets bullied. This predictable archetype honestly makes him really boring. Something else I don't like about him is the fact that he doesn't act as enthusiastic for having Robotboy as I would expect him to be. I mean, don't get me wrong, he loves and appreciates Robotboy, I don't ever doubt that. But if I, for example, were given a super powerful robot to be my best friend as a kid, I would treat him as if he were the walking personification of Christmas. I would love him to death, and I don't see that from Tommy. He treats Robotboy like his closest friend, which isn't a bad thing, but still, act a little more excited. Well, to be fair, I don't think he has room for being excited. His life sucks. His colleagues and family members suck. Seriously, I hate every single member of his family, except his mom. Although it wouldn't hurt if she were a little more respectful towards Tommy's toys. Robotboy is the coolest character, but he's also the most cringe-worthy. The voice actor who plays him tries too hard to impersonate a robot but fails embarrassingly. Also, he sounds like a girl.
Evil! Robotboy, destroy!
Something else that really bothers me about him is the fact that he has conscience, like human level conscience. I hate when they do that in shows and movies. Doesn't anyone understand that robots can't have conscience? Their functionality is a result of binary patterns. Although one could also say that our functionality is a result of neurological patterns. But the difference between humans and robots is that our minds are way more developed than robots, even if sometimes we prove that wrong. For robots to reach the amount of complexity humans have, it would take a lot of time, work, talent, and intelligence. No offense to Professor Mishimo, but he can't accomplish that, especially alone. But honestly, none of this would have bothered me that much if he at least had character. While I wouldn't say he's a walking potato, Robotboy doesn't really have a distinct character. He usually is what the episode wants him to be. His motive is that he wants to become a real boy, but in every episode he is just as much as a real boy as he was in the previous episode. I guess if I had to forcefully describe Robotboy, it would be that he's a naive idiot. Like, sometimes he acts moronic. Like, really moronic. Like in the episode where he was tricked into believing he was actually a real boy when in reality it was just a mask on his head. And then later in the episode he was told to kill Professor Mishimo, otherwise Mishimo would turn him into a robot again. So then he super activated and attempted to blast Mishimo into pieces. Okay, first of all, isn't the fact that you can super activate and shoot people evidence enough to prove that you're still a robot? Secondly, why would you want to kill Professor Mishimo? He gave you life. Guys, all it took to turn Robotboy against his creator and become instantly dangerous was putting a fake mask on his face. You know, those cheap paper masks, even kids find it stupid. I seriously don't understand Professor Mishimo's logic and mindset when he decided to give this to a child when Robotboy is even a threat to Mishimo himself. But getting back to Robotboy, although I'm not intrigued by the amount of character he has, he's not worse than Lola. In fact, no one's worse than Lola because she literally has no character. But not only that, she has no purpose in the show. Tommy is the relatable main character, Robotboy is the kick-ass hero, Gus is the comic relief, Kamikaze is the villain, Moshimo is the creator of Robotboy and Tommy's role model, I think. Lola is Tommy's other friend, who I guess also has feelings for him. Yeah, that's how far her character goes. Then there's the G-Man. I really don't like Gus. He's obnoxious, gross, uncaring, kind of egocentric, and annoying. The thing about Gus is that he feels too much like a fabricated comic relief. Also, his voice is annoying. Mishimo, there's not much I have to say about him other than the fact that he's a transparent lunatic. Lastly, we have Kamikaze. Now, even though I find Kamikaze and Constantine to be very cliche, they're actually the most entertaining part about this show. I would always want them to be the main villains because they're the only ones who actually made me laugh occasionally. That's very impressive, especially since the other recurring villains are pretty meh. Bjorn Bjornson's fine, I guess. However, they're not perfect. Again, they are very cliche villains. Kamikaze is the angry and bossy leader, and Constantine is the reasonable and yelled at sidekick. So yeah, watching them after a while gets really tiresome. But now on a more technical side, the voice acting is pretty amateur. There's a bunch of characters with hokey accents which I can't tell if it's supposed to be taken seriously or not, and if it's supposed to be funny, all I can say is, really, that's what you call comedy? Speaking of comedy, it's pretty weak if you ask me. The idea behind some of the jokes are actually not that bad, but they tend to fail. And you know what? It really doesn't help when every time there's a joke, they play several identifiable sound effects, especially during the scenes with Kamikaze, which I guess it's supposed to imply that it's a funny scene. It's the equivalent of a laugh track. The show doesn't trust the audience will laugh at the jokes, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. The sound editing is horrible. There's a lot of recycling, like seriously ridiculous recycling. Honest to God, I can't tell if there's a single episode where they don't play that sentimental song at the end of every episode.
Oh, Robotboy, I really messed up. I should have listened to you. I'm sorry, buddy. Can you forgive me? I'm really sorry, Robotboy. Can you ever forgive me?
My apologies to you all. I should have known that you can't improve on perfection.
The music direction is so repetitive and formulaic, you become incredibly desensitized even after watching the first season. Which is tragic because, like I said, I like the soundtrack. There's one specific score that plays every time Gus's parents are around that I really like. It somehow manages to not only fit the tone of Gus's parents' nature, but it also implies a certain sadness, which makes sense since Gus usually decreases his mood and feels restricted every time he's around his parents. Too bad they play that score so much. Something else I like to recycle is the super activation sequence. After 3 or 4 episodes, watching Robotboy super activate feels like a punchline. They even use the exact same animation when Robot Girl super activated. Wow, hilarious. In conclusion, Robotboy is kind of a terrible cartoon. No surprise given that it was released at a time cartoons were going through a rough patch, aka the 2000s, aka my era. So don't watch this cartoon, although chances are you weren't going to watch it anyway. It's a bit of a forgotten cartoon and maybe it should remain that way. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye for now.